Good evening. Welcome to Calvary Baptist Church tonight. Thank you for watching on the live stream and for being here in person. Would you please stand with me as we worship together? Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. Want to see you. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you. See you high and lifted up, shining in the light of your glory. Pour out your power and love as we sing, holy, holy, holy. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. Want to see you. To see you high and lifted up, shining in the light of your glory. Pour out your power and love as we sing, holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. I want to see you. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. I want to see you. Amen.
Good evening. I am kind of getting over a cold, so I am sucking a cough drop and trying to keep drinking some water. So if I get too quiet, just shout out and tell me I'm too quiet. Turn, if you would, to Matthew 5. Matthew 5, and we're just going to look at a couple verses tonight. And I'm wanting to kind of go through the Sermon on the Mount kind of slowly. I'm not looking to cover, like huge chunks at a time. But the problem when you do that, when you do kind of little pieces, is sometimes you can sort of lose track of the big picture of things. And so I want to just kind of remind us of where we've been. As we look through that first section that we usually call the Beatitudes, that's where Jesus describes the character of a Christian. This is what a Christian is. And he describes, as, what it is for one to be saved. He talks about the recognition of just spiritual poverty, of just kind of brokenness, of mourning over their sin, of hungering and thirsting for righteousness. He describes through that the idea of being sanctified and set apart, being serving for God, even suffering for his sake, that there's people that will hate you because they hate Jesus. But that is just the character of what a Christian is. That's how they look different. And then from there he goes into this kind of a high view of what Christians are. He says, man, they are salt and light. The people that follow Jesus aren't people that hide who they are. They're people that influence those around them. They they flavor their culture where they're at to make people thirsty for the gospel. They're light. They shine truth wherever they go. They can't help it. And also, one of the things he says that's really important is he says that that he's not really coming to put away the laws. As a matter of fact, he says those that annul the law, those that treat it like it's nothing, they're the least in the kingdom. Jesus takes his word very seriously. And so he's saying that Christians really follow the true intent of the law. He's not doing something completely different. He just wants people to understand what the law is and what it always has been, and then that they need to break with the religion of their day. Okay? The religion of their day is shallow law-keeping, just all about externals, kind of mechanical stuff, but not really about the heart. And so Jesus says, if you want to follow him, you need to have a righteousness that is completely different than the kind of righteousness that Pharisees have. That shallow works-based. It's got to be completely different. It's got to far exceed that. And so then he starts to work his way through the law. Okay? After saying that, hey, don't think the law is. Some people actually make that case and think that Jesus is saying in the Sermon on the Mount that I've done away with kind of the Old Testament. Forget all that. We're doing something completely new. He actually says just the opposite of that. That Christians really follow the true intent of the law, what the law meant all along. And he starts to give some examples of that. And we're kind of in the middle of that now. So he started out with talking about, the law says don't murder people. But you can't pat yourself on the back and say, man, I didn't murder anybody. I haven't murdered anybody in weeks. I'm doing great. The point of that law is that people matter to God. God values people. And so therefore, as Christians, we can't just say, man, we're killing it. We didn't kill anyone. We have to value people. We have to love people. We have to be kind to people. He even just talks about the words that we say. You shouldn't call someone a fool. You shouldn't insult people. People are made in the image and the dignity of God, and so we need to recognize that. That's the real intent of that law. Okay? And then he talked about, the law says don't commit adultery. And he says that, again, deeper into that law isn't just, Christians aren't content to just say, okay, great, I didn't commit adultery. But the idea of it, instead of, I really am pursuing moral purity. Okay? I want a real genuine purity in my life. And so this week, we're going to talk about kind of Jesus' high view of marriage. So if you're in chapter 5, look at verse 31. And we're just going to look at 2 verses. Okay? Jesus says, it was said, whoever sends his wife away, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for the reason of unchastity, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Okay? So again, remember, in each one of these cases, Jesus isn't nullifying the law. He's actually kind of ramping it up. He's making it deeper and broader and in some ways kind of heavier. So this passage that Jesus is quoting about and where he's talking about a certificate of divorce is from Deuteronomy 24. And so if you just want to flip there, I'd like you to see it while we talk about it real briefly. The context of this is that divorce is meant to be a provision to protect women. That was the point of it. Okay? And remember, Jesus says later on in Matthew 19, the only reason this provision exists is because of the hardness of men's hearts. Okay? There are people that are hard-hearted and they don't care how they treat their wives. And so this was meant to be a provision to allow wives kind of a means of escape and to move on with their lives. So look at Deuteronomy 24, verse 1. It says, when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out from his house. And when she leaves his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, and if the latter husband turns against her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, if the later husband dies who took her to be his wife, then the former husband who sent her away is not allowed to take her again to be his wife. Then it just goes on to say, since she has been defiled, for that is an abomination for the Lord. Okay, so the idea here is a woman is when, if a man finds some reason he wants to put his wife away, he's done with her, he's finished, he's to put this certificate in his hand. There wasn't a judge then, you didn't go, and there wasn't a legal process. He writes out a certificate that says, I am divorcing you, and he gives it to her, and she walks away. Now, the importance of that was, okay, that's for her to say, listen, so when she goes out, because in this day, okay, the man is the one earning all the money, and so then if a wife is sent away, it's basically sentencing her to poverty. It's sentencing her to finding some way to labor and make ends meet. And sometimes women would turn to prostitution. It put a woman in a very difficult situation. So with a certificate of divorce, then she could go on and marry someone else and say, look, I haven't abandoned my family. I haven't cheated on anyone. My husband put me away, put her out. And therefore, then she's free to marry someone else. It does say she can't go back to her original husband. Why do you think that is? It's a great topic for audience interaction. No one wants to be the first one to be like, oh. Okay, maybe. What was you going to say, Gene? Oh, okay. Well, I will give you two answers, actually. One, I think, is the obvious one, is God isn't sanctioning kind of wife swapping here. You don't get to say, hey, here's a certificate, you go be with Fred. When Fred is done, you just come back to me, and then later on I'll give you a certificate and you go off with Joe. So the idea here is marriage is a sacred thing, and marriage is meant to be a picture of God's relationship with us. It's meant to be a safe place where families are made and raised. It's meant to be a place where a husband and wife can enjoy one another and enjoy that fellowship. It's kind of the cornerstone of culture and the world. And so he said, man, this is important. We don't just treat this like, all right, now I'm just going to give you a perpetual list of Post-it notes so I can say, I'm done with you, I'll take you back. I'm done with you, I'll take you back. No, that's a one-way street. So you should take that seriously. Don't divorce for no good reason. Okay, that's one. I think the other reason for it is it kind of suggests that there wasn't legitimate grounds for the divorce to begin with, and so because divorce is a one-way street and you need to think about it seriously, then it shouldn't just be frivolous reasons. It shouldn't be a reason that's not a biblical reason, and we're going to come back to that in a little bit. Okay. So why is this here? Doesn't it kind of seem like, well, it seems like, well, if this is meant to protect women from kind of hard-hearted men, then isn't that kind of like a compromise on God's part? What, is it that God is saying, all right, well, I know you guys are going to be crummy, so I guess, here you are. In Matthew 19, the passage that I referenced earlier, some Pharisees are trying to trick Jesus, and they come up to him, and Matthew 19, verse 3. Some Pharisees came to Jesus testing him and asking, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all? Okay, notice the tricky language there. And he answered and said, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? He said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. So listen, you don't get divorced. Why? Well, because this is God's deal. This is his invention. And And the woman is created uniquely for the man, and the man is created uniquely from the woman to complement one another. And this is God's design. And the point of this is that two people will come together and become one and make a family together and have a life together. And there is this union that occurs, and you've entered into that. You've entered into this thing that God has created. And so the marriage ceremony, the vows, the blessings that come with marriage, all that's done to bless this union of becoming one flesh. And so that's why Jesus references back to creation. This is the way God made them. So if that's true, why does God allow it then? And that's what they ask. Verse 7, they said to him, then why did Moses command to give her a certificate of divorce and to send her away? And Jesus said to him, because of the hardness of your heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it has not always been this way. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. Okay? So God recognizes that it's people's tendency. It's our sinfulness to take advantage of one another, even in the relationships that should be the safest. Even in that relationship that should bring life and blessing to us, sometimes people are just cruel to one another. And so in that case, God is looking out for people, and God is especially looking out for the woman here to protect her. She is the one that's most vulnerable. And so rather than send a woman out into poverty and stigmatize them, there is this gracious exception that God allows. But that's not the intent. The intent isn't just like get married and get divorced and get married and get divorced. There is an intent. There is an intention on God's case that marriage is this mechanism where women are cared for and protected. But mankind even corrupts those things that God intends for protection. So in Deuteronomy 24, it says he finds some indecency in her, right? And so in Jesus' day, then they made a lot of hay with that word, indecency. What does it mean? Well, indecency could mean your wife burned your dinner. Indecency could mean she talks too loud. Indecency could mean you just don't think she's pretty anymore. And so because of that, that is this kind of, that's very similar to what we see in the Pharisees, right? This kind of shallow understanding of the law, this kind of just sort of very mechanical, very shallow, very letter of the law-ish use of that, essentially to get what they want. But like in every one of these, God had a purpose for that law. And God's purpose is that marriage is this place where agape love is shown, sacrificial love is shown. It's meant to be something that protects the wife. And so that's God's intent. That's Jesus's intent, is love and care and protection. And so just like not murdering, the intention was, man, value people, be kind to people. His intention for not to commit adultery was that we really pursue real moral purity. And in this case, although God allows it, that's not his best. What would be better is that there's a relationship of mutual love and sacrifice, and people are cared for and treated with love. Now, verse 32 there, I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for the reason of unchastity, makes her commit adultery. So he tightens it down and says, listen, I want to deal with this just divorce her for anything idea. It needs to be really serious. It needs to be this violation of the marriage covenant of unfaithfulness. And then Paul will clarify later on and say, well, there's also this idea of abandonment. One just abandons you. So this part I wanted to look at because this isn't an easy text here, what it says. It says, except for the reason of adultery, or for unchastity, makes her commit adultery. Okay? And the wording there is actually, he adulterizes her. What does that mean? Okay? And this is important. I want to point this out because we come into this all the time in the Bible where we're trying to figure out what something means. And what we can't do is say, well, I don't necessarily like what I think it says here, but I do like this verse over here that talks about that topic. So I'm just going to pretend that the Bible contradicts itself, and I like what it says over here. Okay? We can't do that because the Bible is written by the Holy Spirit. It's got the same author. It has the same message. So we don't want to try to pit verses against one another. We also don't just want to abandon verses and say, well, I just don't really like what it says, but here's my opinion. Okay? What we always need to do is look at the places in the Bible that talks about that topic and how can we understand them in a way that they harmonize? How can we understand them in a way that all of them make sense and all of them share a message that is cohesive? Does that make sense? Okay. So there's really two ways of looking at what this means. Interpretation one is, so in order for a woman to survive, she would need to go out and marry someone else. And so some would say this text is saying, when you divorce your wife for like an unbiblical reason, just for a frivolous reason, then you essentially, you push her out of the home and you push her into a situation where she's going to need to get remarried. And because you didn't really have good grounds for divorce, you're not really divorced, therefore you're forcing her to commit adultery. That's actually kind of the standard interpretation. And if that's the way you think, that's fine, but I'll tell you why I don't like that one, why I don't think it makes sense. Because this whole passage is based on Deuteronomy 24, right? And what's it say? If he gives her a certificate of divorce, then she can go out and remarry. So this, I don't think, can be saying, hey, if she remarries, then you're forcing her to commit adultery. So that wouldn't jive with Deuteronomy 24. Here's what I think it means, is that when you divorce her for this reason, you put her in the light of an immoral woman. You stigmatize her as if she's an adulteress, okay? When really she's not. And so do you remember the story of Tamar in Samuel? Okay, there was I'm drawing a blank on his name. So there's this guy, he sees Tamar, and he's like, man, I'm just infatuated with her. I want to go to bed with her. And essentially he's going to rape her. And she pleads with him, don't do this terrible thing. You're going to bring a reproach on me. You're going to bring a reproach on yourself. Don't do this. And he does rape her. And then it says, and then he looks at her and despises to look at her. Because now when he looks at her, he sees his sin, his shame, his failure. Okay? And then now he just wants to put her out. He wants to ignore her. He doesn't want to acknowledge anything that happens. And what she says in 2 Samuel 13 says then, it's in my own notes. Amnon was the dude's name. It helps if you read your own notes. Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, for the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, get up and go away. But she said to him, no, because this wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you have done to me. But he wouldn't listen to her. How would it be greater? The idea that now she's pushed out, and in addition to the great, not to minimize the wickedness of rape as awful and grievous and sinful, and okay, but she's saying this idea of now I have to live with this shame and this reproach and this stigma for the rest of my life. That even seems more unbearable to me. A similar thing happens when King David has these concubines, and at one point they think What's the dude with the long hair, right? Gets caught in the tree. Help me out. Absalom, thank you. So he wants to show that he's the big guy in charge, so he sleeps with all of his dad's concubines. Gross. But later on, when he gets dispatched and David kind of returns to power, and there's a reproach on all those ladies, and he never has any relationship with them again. They stay in the palace. They never go outside. There is this stigma that goes with that. And I really think that's what the Lord is talking about there, is that when you divorce your wife without cause, you stigmatize her. She has to live with this forever. She's seen as off limits in some way. And so Jesus is kind of proposing a new ethic here, though I don't even think that's the right way to say it. It's not so much a new ethic, it is a clarification of the biblical ethic, which is, hey, instead of just putting your wife away for bad reasons, how about you do your duty? And how about you care for her? And how about you love her? And how about you protect her? Instead of, unless there is unfaithfulness. I think probably most of us are familiar with that verse in Malachi that says God hates divorce, right? Have you ever heard that? Okay. Here's the context of that, though. In Malachi 2, God says, if you don't listen and if you will not take heart to give honor to my name, says the Lord of hosts, then I will send the curse upon you, and I will curse your blessings. And indeed, I have cursed them already, because you are not taking it to heart. Behold, I'm going to rebuke your offspring, and I will spread refuge on your faces, the refuge of your feasts, and you will be taken away with it. God is saying, listen, you won't learn, you won't listen, you won't act on what I've said. And so I'm going to rebuke you, I'm going to punish you. It's like I'm going to rub garbage in your face. Your feasts are going to be turned to trash. God is going to judge them in every way. And God does that in the Old Testament, right? How many times do we see he judges Israel militarily, financially, relationally? But what exactly is God upset about? Verse 13. This is another thing you do to cover the altar with your tears and weeping and groaning, because he no longer regards the offering or accepts it with favor from your hand. So God says, man, I'm disgusted with you. You come to the altar, you come and you just like weep and cry, that I'm not listening to you. And so you make this big show of your offering. And yet you say, for what reason? God, why don't you accept our offerings? Why aren't you hearing us? And then God says, okay, I'll tell you the reason. Because the Lord has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth, against whom you have dealt treacherously, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. He says, I'll tell you why I'm mad. You've treated your wives bad. You've treated your wives treacherously. And notice he calls her the wife of your youth. Why is that? Not because they're necessarily young right then. He's talking to all of Israel. It's like, man, in your youth, that's when you made that covenant with her. That's when you made your promises. And guess what? I was there. I know what you said. I know what you promised. Okay? I know you made a covenant. And you're dealing treacherously with it. She trusted you. She trusted you to care for her and protect her. And now you're tricking her. Okay? You are not doing those things. But no one has done so who has a remnant of the Spirit. This isn't the way God's people act. This isn't the way Spirit-filled people act. And what did that one do while he was seeking a godly offspring? Take heed then to your spirit, and let no one deal treacherously against the wife of your youth. Man, take it as a warning. Okay? Don't deal that way with your wife. Verse 16, why? For I hate divorce, says the Lord, the God of Israel, and him who covers his garment with wrong. Think about that for a second. God says, I don't just hate divorce. He says, I hate divorce and him, that guy, okay? That treacherous guy that's doing that. I hate him too. God, you're getting kind of harsh. Okay? And him who covers his garment with wrong, says the Lord of hosts, So take heed to your spirit that you do not deal treacherously. Okay? So that's the point of this text. So I hate sometimes when we come to that text and we're like, all right, well, let's just find all the reasons for why we're, allowed to get a divorce and not get a divorce. That's not the point. Just like we come to the other text about murder, and it's just like, all right, well, in what way am I allowed to get away with murder? Okay, if they're in my house, if they're rushing at me, that wasn't Jesus' point. Jesus' point was, well, hey, maybe you should value that person and show kindness. Okay? Just like when he says don't commit adultery, it's the whole point of that isn't for me to like, all right, well, how close can I get until it's adultery? Can I look at someone else? Can I sit next to them on the bus? Can I hold their hand? Can I kiss their ear? Like, that's not the point. And in this case, it's not the point of like, all right, well, great. So here's divorce. So, all right, Jesus, what are all the reasons I'm allowed to have a divorce and not have a divorce? The point is, that is a protection for women. So you know what would be better? To just protect women. To just do your duty to your wife. To just cultivate a healthy and a good marriage. I heard this story, and I will end here. I just thought it was great, and I kind of wanted to share it with you. Who's heard of a guy named Jack Benny? Okay, so it was before my time, but I know it's definitely before most of your time. But so he had the Jack Benny show. He was a performer. It's actually even before TV, when kind of radio was a big thing. And so he was a celebrity. He had a show, and forget that. Here's the part that I think was cool. Okay, so him and his wife, he loved her, and every day he came home from work, he brought her a rose. And that was just kind of their thing. That was their little thing for him to communicate to her that he loved her, and he would come home, and sometimes he wouldn't give it to her right away, and she'd be like, where's my rose? Then he would give it to her. And just kind of this really neat story. And he ends up, of the two of them, he passes away first. And he's gone, and then there's a funeral, and then the next day, there's a knock at the door. And she opens the door, and there's the florist, and he gives her a rose. And one of the last things that Jack Benny did before he died was to contract with a local florist to send her a rose every single day of her life until she died. So Jack Benny loved his wife all through his life, and then he loved her after that. And to me, that is where Jesus is going here, this idea of marriage is to be sacred, and marriage is the opportunity for two people to love and to care for one another. And I mentioned earlier, marriage is this great picture of how Christ loves the church. So, does the Lord love his people? Did he choose you before the foundation of the earth, die on the cross to save you? Okay. Does he convert us? Does he write our name in the Lamb's Book of Life? Does he prepare a place for us in the Father's house? Okay. Is he coming again to gather his people? The Lord is a faithful husband, and he protects and cares for and provides for his bride. So in the course of thinking about this, let's not forget that. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts?
Actually, that made me cry. That was touching. Anyway, my husband gave me roses a lot. That was like touched me. But anyway,
Chuck was a good guy.
He was, poor guy had to put up with me for.
I've said many times when we get to heaven, I'm going to blow by the Apostle Paul and seek out Chuck.
Were women allowed to initiate a divorce or not then? Is that why you just admitted it?
Yeah, everything we see in the Bible is the man initiating, which makes things, we have to then look at that and say, all right, I've only got so much time on Wednesday night, but there are there certainly times where, a man was faithful and dutiful and cared for his wife and protected her, and she does him wrong? Yeah. But since biblically this is a case meant to protect women, the idea would be they would be the one that would be isolated. They would be the one that would more be pushed out into poverty. But now that that's more, I don't know if it's 50-50 or I think maybe even women might initiate more divorces than men. You have to find the biblical principle there too. How do we apply that now? But biblically speaking, I never really see it. It's the man initiating it.
I think a lot of people wonder that, when they come to this kind of verses. Kind of a tricky one, but you probably
This one is tricky, and I understand people struggle with it.
Yeah.
I get it. It's not a super easy text. But I think the situation always is if there's biblical grounds for something, then it's implied that that then you're free. Mm-hmm. You're free to remarry.
Makes sense.
Although I didn't want to do a treatise on divorce and marriage. That's a thorny topic that I'm unprepared for. I appreciate it, Cam. All right, let us talk about what all we would like to pray about tonight. Cam, you can catch me afterward, and I'll see if I know anything at all or not.